Given how often I go after the idea of proselytizing as a problem with many religions, and how frequently I talk about allyship with atheists, you'd think I'd have done a video on the reason why by now. You think I'm organized, that's funny. But as some arguments put forward in the community recently have compared mine and other pagans' educational work to proselytizing, or mistaken it for such, I figure now's as good time as any to actually, discuss the topic in a bit more depth. What's the problem with proselytization? Let's do this. Kairete! Before we dig in, I've got some thanks to give. Brian R., one of my Daimon patrons, was kind enough to pick me up not one, but 2 books on gay rights in ancient Greece. Greek Homosexuality by K.J. Dover, and Homosexuality in Greece and Rome, a source book of documents. Thank you so much, Brian. It's on my list, and as soon as I get around to it, that video will be coming out. We also have a new fan art submission, newly colored by Jack and Quill. Ocean and I silently judging Jen for when she's about to use the word heathen to describe atheists. Hilarious. Thank you so much for your art. Before we get into the meat of this, I've got a caveat, and that's that I'm not exactly qualified to discuss cognitive or social psychology. When I'm talking about these subjects and theories that follow, it's as a layperson who's taken a few college courses on the subject, read some research, and fielded a lot of clarifying questions to a friend who knows a lot more than me. As such, make sure to do some of your own research as well, and don't just take my words at face value here. Special thanks to my friend Fire, by the way, for helping guide me to some topics in psychology I could dig into regarding proselytization. It saved me a ton of time flailing about in my own research. With that out of the way, we first need to define what it is I'm criticizing. What is proselytizing? For the purpose of this video, proselytization is any communication meant to convert the recipient to a different religious belief or lack thereof, especially if that attempt is made through contact uninitiated by the recipient, individually or personally targeted, and/or aggressive in nature. Yes, atheists do it too. Cue my comments filling up with angry anti-theists and street epistemologists telling me exactly what I can stick where. Get it out of your system now. We all know you aren't gonna watch the video. For those of you who can still hear me over the angry din of keyboard tapping, it takes a lot of forms beyond just the Mormon or Jehovah's Witness or Baptist who knocked on your door last week to tell you the good news. YouTube videos like those made by Girl Defined or The Transformed Wife, blog posts like Biblical Gender Roles or Living Waters, those annoying billboards that ask you where your soul is going, the Bible's left in every hotel room's top drawer, and the pamphlets and mailers left in your mailbox are all a form of proselytization. Obviously, most of the material mentioned here is Christian, and that's in part because Christians are the most ubiquitous when it comes to their conversion tactics, but as I said, atheists, Muslims, some Buddhists, and others can do this too. So, you might be asking, what makes that pamphlet in your mailbox from the local Seventh-day Adventists any different than my Common Hellenism series, apart from the medium? The difference is in the power dynamic in the conversation and the intent. Let me explain. That pamphlet is meant to be a gateway into a series of arguments intended to persuade you to Christianity. When you watch my video on Hydes or what Homer believed about it, I'm perfectly fine if you walk away from that with a shrug and, well, that was interesting, but continue in whatever belief you currently have. My object in making that video is to inform, not to persuade. The people who make the pamphlet, on the other hand, are convinced you're gonna burn forever if you aren't convinced. They feel a moral imperative to convince you that they're right because the consequences are dire. Even without the moral imperative, as one would find with atheists, there's still an inherent power dynamic where one party sees themselves as in the right and is driven to convince you that you most certainly are not. When proselytizing happens in politics rather than religion, it's called propaganda, and I've made a fair bit of it talking about propaganda made by other people, but I digress. The concept of proselytization itself isn't always an issue, but often the tactics used by folks to convert one another make it one. For example, at some point I'm going to be making a video on hell belief and the way that Muslims and Christians use it to scare people into their faith or away from converting on their own to something else. Ocean Keltway did an excellent video on latent Christianity, link is in the iCard, and one of the things he talked about was the fear of hell taking a while to go away even after he deconverted. I know personally that even after I did, I would still sometimes have nightmares about burning and wake up in terror that I had made the wrong choice by first becoming a Wiccan, then an agnostic before becoming a Hellenist. By the time I made my way to Hellenism, I was over the fear, but it lasted for years, and that's the point. To understand why this happens to us, we need to look at a pair of concepts: terror management theory and mortality salience. Terror management theory was a concept first proposed by anthropologist Ernest Becker and later expanded upon by Greenberg, Solomon, and someone whose last name terrifies me to attempt to pronounce. It's on the screen now. I don't know. The basic idea is that the majority of human motivation towards self-esteem is to mitigate the existential terror of impending death. Mortality salience, on the other hand, is the awareness of the inevitability of one's death. I have linked a website and a meta-analysis below talking about the effects. According to the meta-analysis, when mortality salience is induced in people, there's a large chance of something called a conservative shift occurring, where people minimize risk-taking behavior and emphasize safety. If that Mormon or Baptist knocks on the door of someone who has just lost a loved one, or if a Christian friend slides into the DMs after losing another friend, the target is vulnerable to this conservative shift and may adopt a set of beliefs and lifestyle that ultimately harms them because of the hijacking of their psychology. Note that this doesn't mean that all of religion is just due to terror management theory. Anti-theists love that argument, but there are many structures one can use besides religion to mitigate fear of death. People often try to leave behind legacies that will make them quote-unquote immortal by trying to leave lasting change in the world through their actions. For those who do come to a religion due to a fear of death, it's important to bear in mind that often this isn't enough to keep them in the faith, especially pagan faiths. Most of us are driven by building relationships with deity, not trying to vie for a better afterlife or even an afterlife at all. Some people are driven to atheism to alleviate their fear of death as well, as knowing that nothing comes after can be its own kind of comfort and drive one to make meaning in life, same as those who believe in gods. Needless to say though, hell belief and punishment-based afterlives, alongside the concept of eternal rebirth into misery without a specific way out, are used to induce mortality salience and the conservative shift. It's a shitty tactic for conversion that is also used to keep people in faith when they no longer believe, but are too afraid of these punishments to, well, leave. Next time you drive by one of those billboards asking you where you're going when you die, well, now you know what forces are at work with them and what they're meant to do. Community pressure is another conversion tactic often used to induce conformity or the desire to fit in with the local community. This is an especially effective tactic for converting folks who move into small towns or closeting atheists or pagans who have left Christianity or Islam. Humans are social animals. Assuming our brains are functioning correctly and excluding certain personality disorders, we inherently want to find acceptance in our communities and feel a near physical pain from rejection. Evolutionarily, this makes sense. No matter how awesome you think you are at survival, a single human has far less of a chance in a wild than a tribe or a village. Conformity is far more powerful in the average person than you'd think, too. Solomon Asch conducted an experiment in 1951 to test how social pressure could influence a person's answers to a simple, easily answered question. He posed it as a vision test, and had the real participants answer which line was longest. There were 7 Confederates, or researchers, in on the experiment that would give the wrong answer before the real participant. In 1/3 of the experimental trials, the participant gave the same answer as the Confederates. There was a control group with only real participants as well, no Confederates. They gave the answer correctly 100% of the time. When interviewed afterward, the participants who conformed said they didn't believe their incorrect answers but went along with the group because they were afraid of being mocked or labeled aberrant. Few said that they thought the group must know more than they did if they all agreed with each other. Later on, Asch did additional experiments changing up the variables and found that conformity varied with the size of the majority. 3 to 5 people as a majority induced the highest conformity values, with additional numbers having little effect. He did another variation later that added an ally, which dropped conformity from 1/3 to just 5%. Conformity also increased when the answer was less obvious in a future trial, which brings us to the question about mortality and the existence of deities and afterlives. I'm pretty sure the majority of my audience can see how conformity is wielded in majority cultures for conversion, as well as in cults when members first join. It's often paired with love bombing, or showering a potential convert with kindness and affection until the person is integrated into the group, so that they feel the urge to conform more strongly. It's yet another hijacking of the brain's instinctive survival mechanisms, often to perpetuate harmful beliefs such as the rejection of personal LGBT identity or self-hate newly identified as sin. The withdrawal of that love bombing on successful conversion, unless certain standards of behavior are met, will push the convert to stay within the faith, even to the detriment of their own mental health. The pressure to conform is increased further when power dynamics are at play between the recipient and the proselytizer. Missionaries with access to greater technology, wealth, and resources, as well as Christian homeless programs, will often make religious indoctrination and conversion a requirement for receipt of those services. People convert to a different faith just to be able to survive or gain access to sanitation, food, water, medicine, etc. This power dynamic is clearly coercive, and often services will be cut off if the person refuses to convert or expresses hints of deconversion. A last note on conformity is sometimes legal consequences are used as a conversion tactic. Many pagans and atheists I know have expressed fear about living openly as themselves because in their area, that may mean police intervention and the loss of their kids over the religious question. I know someone personally who has had CPS called on them because they allowed me and my partners into their kids' lives as family. We've never done anything abusive, the person was just a highly conservative Christian who thought our very presence in their lives would have a harmful effect. There's a link in the description below to a list of discriminatory practices associated with fundamentalist charities and employers. Go take a look when you get a chance. The consequences can make finding allies near impossible due to closeting, which then increases the pressure to conform. I don't need to explain why this is a major problem, do I? Conformity is actually related to the next psychological manipulation proselytizers often use, which is the power of an authority figure. The most well-known experiment done on the influence of an authority figure was the Milgram shock experiment. Participants were sat in a chair with a dial going up to supposedly lethal voltage and instructed to punish another participant, who was actually a lab assistant, for getting answers wrong to questions. The researchers instructed participants to increase the voltage gradually, all the way to lethal levels, while the assistant screamed and howled in pain. Thankfully, they weren't actually being shocked, but the participants didn't know that, and the majority went all the way to lethal voltage levels when instructed to by researchers. That's about 2/3 or 2 out of every 3 people you know that would do that, by the way. Milgram put forward the hypothesis that this had to do with shifting the responsibility for their actions onto the authority figure, the so-called just following orders excuse. This is more common when indoctrinating kids, and I have to caveat that teaching a kid a religion is only indoctrination if they're discouraged from or punished for outside exploration. Teaching a kid a religion is not abuse. Forbidding them from deviating from the religion taught is. Also, if a religion contains practices that are directly physically or mentally harmful to the kid, that can also be abuse, but again, this should be obvious given the constant discussions on the channel about reducing religious harm. This can happen with adults as well, especially if the person has power over you or is in a higher social class. I was forced to closet at a job I had back when I was a Wiccan. Supposedly, customers had complained about my pentacle when coworkers were allowed to wear crosses and other religious paraphernalia. Eventually, I was fired from the job for quote-unquote not fitting in, despite coworkers seeing me as one of the more diligent and dedicated workers there, and a lot of people speculated it was because my boss was a hardcore Baptist. Before we get to the wrap-up, I'd like to discuss a few problems with proselytization in current times. Door knocking or traveling to isolated places could introduce people to new and exciting diseases, and given the current pandemic and the terrifying implications of being able to spread it without even having symptoms yet, it's not exactly the healthiest idea if you catch my drift. In the past, missionaries have spread things like smallpox and measles through contact with isolated tribes, and in the modern day, there are still people that very may well kill you if you try to spread the quote-unquote good news. Proselytizing can also be used as a tool for cultural genocide. For the past 200 years until the late 70s, it was illegal for Indigenous Americans and Canadians to practice the faith passed down in our tribes, or even speak our languages. Religion and conversion were the excuse. Kill the Indian to save the man. Conversion by the sword was also a really common tactic, and in some countries today, it is illegal not to participate in the state religion. Penalties can include fines, indefinite imprisonment, and death. These are forms of proselytization through authority, and it's clear why they're terrible. Given all the messed up manipulative tactics used for proselytization, it sounds like I'm arguing that no one should ever do it, but that's not exactly the case. The tactics and power dynamics involved are a major problem, but that doesn't mean that proselytization is wrong in every instance. For example, if you have a friend who's stuck in a cult that's causing them a great deal of mental and physical harms, it is absolutely okay to help them find their way out. Likewise, if people are espousing harmful beliefs such as folkist rhetoric or beliefs justified with pseudoscience, like using essential oils to kill or prevent diseases. If you're going to try and pull someone out of harmful beliefs, though, respect is tantamount. Forcing someone into a conversation and trying to scare them out is going to do more harm than good, and you really need to consider whether the belief is harmful or not. Anti-theists often argue that any belief is harmful, and I already went over why that isn't the case in the open letter I did a while back. It's important to understand the negative impact that the beliefs are directly having. The friend not getting cancer treatment might die, and the Jehovah's Witness having their entire life controlled is definitely suffering, but your cousin who likes to cast spells every once in a while may not be falling down a perpetual rabbit hole of woo. It's good to find out from the person themselves what they believe and how it's affecting them. Don't assume you know. Watch for warning signs and try to engage honestly with the other person as a full, equal participant in the conversation. See why they believe as they do, and listen more than you speak. Ask questions that arise from the conversation itself without trying to force your ideas onto them, and don't offer explanations and evidence unless you're asked to. It takes time to build up the belief, and it's gonna take just as much time to pull someone out. Make sure you're more of a support than an adversary. Basically, don't be a dick, or they're gonna dig their heels in even more. And don't expect them to fully deconvert off the eradication of just 1 or 2 harmful beliefs. That takes even more time, and sometimes there are consequences that you might not see for pulling out. Let them go at their own pace, and make sure you're there on the other side. And no, Your own beliefs about the afterlife and eternal punishment are not an excuse to force other people to believe as you do. If you think they are, take a good hard look at what you've been taught and why. You might be surprised at what you find. Thank you so much for sitting through that. If you're new here and haven't already airlifted a dumpster to set on fire in my comments section, have a calm conversation with the subscribe button about its purpose in your life. Pull in the notification bell for support, and maybe drop a like if you found anything useful. Warm your hands by the dumpster fire in the comments, and let me know if there's anything I left out, or share your own horror stories about proselytizers and the mayhem that they cause. Special thanks to GaelicNox for their art, as always, linker in the description below to their website and Twitter. And special thanks to my patrons. Every week, you all are there supporting my content and making it possible for me to get the books and resources I need to keep putting out videos like this. The Patreon bonus video this week should be out for you all fairly soon, and it's about what to do about contradictions and myths of pagans, so I'm looking forward to seeing what you all think. And remember, faith ain't fear.